General Allen, that you can't even tell us in open session, yes or no, whether the National Security Agency intercepts the telephone conversations of American citizens in America?
Sir, I believe that a discussion of our operations is properly held in closed session.
The action that we do is very closely circumscribed. Secondly, that the question... I
heard your testimony. Don't repeat it. You made it very clear. You ask no questions. You
yes, but the,
and
but
you
the
proceed.
Question, but
and you don't know whether you're seriously invading the rights of private citizens. You obviously are.
This is not a new debate. Congresswoman Bella Abzug, back in 1975, along with the chair of the Intelligence Committee, Otis Pike, when the NSA was first discovered collecting information on Americans. The debate back this week. We're joined to talk about on the roundtable by George Will, Paul Krugman of the New York Times, and Princeton University, Matthew Dowd from ABC, Greta Van Susteren, Fox News, and Congressman Keith Ellison. So George, we got both sides of the debate pretty well in that first half hour. Where do you come down on this?
We are threatened by needles in a haystack. Very few needles in a very large haystack, really a 7 billion world population. We're threatened not by a nation, but by a network. It is the nature of a terrorist network to be invisible until made visible. Hence, when there's an attack, we talk about who didn't connect the dots. In the data that they are gathering, the dots are. With sophisticated algorithms, they try and reveal the dots and reveal the network. Before they can act on this, there are two levels of judicial supervision. They need the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court to authorize looking at the pattern of usage of phones and internet, and then another judicial review to look at the messages, the content of what they're doing. Now, this is the case 4. The problem is we're using technologies of information gathering that didn't exist 20 years ago, that are terribly important but terribly invasive, and they require reposing extraordinary trust in the executive branch of government, which some of us think it has recently forfeited.
And there was a really good article written 5 years ago by Jack Balkin at the Yale Law School. He said that technology means that we're going to be living in a surveillance state. That's just going to happen. But there are different kinds of surveillance states. You can have a democratic surveillance state which collects as little data as possible and tells you as much as possible about what it's doing. Or you can have an authoritarian surveillance state which collects as much as possible and tells the public as little as possible. And we are kind of on the authoritarian side.
Well, let me bring that to Congressman Ellison, because you're not on the Intelligence Committee.
No, I'm not.
Correct. But you are a member of Congress. The president had said on Friday that, every member of Congress has access to the information. Can you just first start out by explaining what a member of Congress who's not on the committee knows about this program or can know about this program?
I'd say almost nothing. The reality is you can't bring your staff in there. So we are moving around Capitol Hill at lightning speed. Nearly every member of Congress is. If you can't get any staff support, that means you got to go into that room. You got to sit there and pour through documents over the course of hours.
But are you allowed to see everything?
I don't think I am. I'm allowed to see certain things, and they tell us it's available if you make time at certain times and places to go see it. But the fact is, no, I am not aware of this program that was revealed today. I have no notice. We checked our emails and our notices. We were never told that we were able to find out the information's been revealed this week. So I think it's a fiction. It's a fiction that everybody in Congress knows. No, nobody, very few people in Congress.
So you voted on it, but without full knowledge.
I voted against the Patriot Act.
You voted against it.
And I voted against it because we don't know what we don't know. I don't know what they're up to.
I take issue with George on one thing. Why does this have to be secret? Why can't we know about this? Maybe, if we all know about it, we all agree that it's a good idea. We live in a very different society, but we're supposed to have a transparent government. Well, we don't have.
How much should we know, I guess?
We should know it exists. So that we know there are cameras in Boston, and people apparently like cameras in Boston. Why can't we know their phones? Like, if everybody knew that the phone numbers are being kept or maintained by the NSA, maybe the terrorists would start using Pony Express and smoke signals. We'd slow them down a little bit. They'd use some other means of communication. But now we're giving them we're giving them password and letting them think that maybe they can do it fast and slippery through the internet. The second thing is the FISA court that signs the warrant, that gives the permission. The FISA court, and I got to give credit to Rick Klein of ABC News. He tipped me off to it that there's a 2012 letter from the NSA to Senator Harry Reid, and there are 1,789 requests in calendar year 2012 or until August 30th, 2012. 1,789 requests. Of the 1,789 requests for authorization, one was withdrawn by the government. All the other ones were granted.
It's a rubber stamp.
It's a rubber stamp. And what they should have is some public counsel or somebody at least arguing on the other side. It's a totally one-sided
operation. Well, that's the other problem. At this court, only the government presents
right.
the arguments.
And look at what they did with the warrant with James Rosen. You can see that they do go in and they present warrants to judges that are rather questionable warrants, and judges just sign them. And what do we think about 1,788 out of 1,788?
George, I think there's a couple of points here. First is that the idea that the president stands up there and people in the administration stand up there and say, don't worry about this. We're not listening to your phone calls, so it's okay. It's not that much of an invasion of privacy. Anybody that understands, and I have a pretty good understanding of how data is collected and how data is collected on phone records, is that you can do a complete lifestyle analysis of somebody, and it's actually a deeper invasion of privacy to do this sort of...
But they're saying they don't do that unless they can
well, what they're saying
is,
trust us. Trust us on this. They're saying that we're doing this, we're going to protect you. And that's my second point on this. This is a balance between an erosion of civil liberties and a protection of public safety. And what the Congress and the president is telling us is there's a serious erosion of civil liberties. They don't say there's not an erosion of civil liberties. They say it's worth it to erode civil liberties in this way because it's going to protect you in a certain way. We're not going to tell you how many of you are protected. We're not going to tell you how many times it has, but trust that we're going to be able to do this.
We're learning a little bit about that, though, and let me bring this to George Will. I think, almost 1,500 reports from this NSA program made it into the president's daily brief, about 1 out of every 7 intelligence reports. That would seem to indicate some use from this information, and we heard the chair say that at least in 2 cases, they believe at least, that the program helped stop an attack.
And to the extent that we can do so without revealing methods and sources, we ought to make this public. I actually agree entirely with Greta. Pat Moynihan wrote a wonderful book on secrecy. He said secrecy, A, makes the government stupid because it hides secrets from itself. B, it encourages paranoia because people don't know what's going on. C, conservatives ought to understand secrecy is government regulation. It's government regulation of information, and they ought to be skeptical about it. But all 6 of us already this morning have left a digital trail. We've used a credit card, we've used a cell phone. It's constant and ubiquitous.
One thing worth saying also, the notion that revealing this is telling the terrorists something. It's saying only if the terrorists haven't watched a single TV thriller in the last 20 years, right? Everybody knows. Everybody has to have suspected that something like this was going on.
But as Greta says, they can't go to the Pony Express. There are limits to what they can do. They are a network. They have to communicate, and they're in a bind.
So what are the next steps here?
Well, I think we need to review the law. I think it casts too wide a net. And I think we ought to remember that the best way to protect the American public is to have active police work that follows up on leads that actually exist. Just figuring out, what somebody's phone calls are in Peoria or Minneapolis, for that matter, anybody who's not even connected, I don't think is worthwhile. And if it is, I think somebody needs to come make a case as to why they need that information. I think we passed this law when we were very much afraid and for a legitimate reason, and it's time to come back and really introduce privacy into the conversation.
It also shows that, interestingly, how much different candidate Obama and Senator Obama was and what he said and what he's done as president of the United States. It's basically like, oh, I can say all this, but now that I'm president, I forget everything I said, forget everything I criticized George W. Bush for, forget everything I said about Dick Cheney, forget everything I said about the government, forget everything I said about we're going to make it transparent, we're going to make government transparent. Oh, by the way, everything George W. Bush did, I'm going to put on steroids because it's going to protect the public.
Couldn't that be an honest consequence of reading those intelligence reports?
Yes, but also...
Then say it.
Keep in mind, then be careful of what you say as a candidate and be careful of what you say as a U.S.
I think it's the nature of the job. The executive is always going to go right up to the line. It's the responsibility of the legislature to balance these important equities.
Do you think Congress has done their job in overseeing?
No, I don't. I think we need to peel it back, and we need to make sure that we're considering the Constitution when we write these kind of laws.
This is where the IRS scandal metastasizes into a national security scandal. Because I'm sure I'm not the only American saying, under the look at the NSA information gathering, saying, well, this would really be a problem if we had the kind of government that, say, unleashes the IRS on political opponents. Oh, come to think about it, we do have that kind of government. And therefore, the willingness to trust the executive branch is today minimal and should be.
Well, I mean, back in, I think it was, I don't know what year it was, but you said, besides terrorism,
anytime something comes out of somebody's pocket,
it's not the only new danger in this era. Another is the administration's argument that because the president is the commander-in-chief, he is the sole organ of the nation in foreign affairs. You were talking about George Bush at that time. You know, George, I actually don't disagree with much you said. My only problem is you can't make this an Obama problem. This is an executive problem.
I didn't mention Obama. I am saying that, in fact, today, the executive branch, whether...
And yesterday.
And, well, we will find out. We should have lots of hearings about this. But the executive branch ought to be feared. This country was founded on a revolution primarily against what was called executive prerogative of the executive at the time, George III.
No argument on that.
But to take that, the whole issue is the credibility of the government. And you talk about, who can trust the government. We just saw Senator Dianne Feinstein do the most incredible two-step defending General Clapper in his testimony before.
Because she couldn't defend what he said in that.
No, but she should have, you know what she should have said? She should have said, look, I can't defend it, ask him, he said it. Instead, she says, well, sometimes the questions are misunderstood. And, when she started backpedaling like that, just stand up, and have the courage to say, or when President Obama changes his mind on things about, well, I was a candidate and I thought this, I'm now sitting in the Oval Office, I now understand, I've changed my view. Have a little credibility and say the obvious. When you do that two-step, we also roll our eyes.
The problem, Greta, as you and I talked about is that everything in Washington is viewed through a partisan lens. So if George W. Bush did something and Democrats didn't like it, it was bad. And if Barack Obama does something and Republicans don't like it, it's bad. And even things Barack Obama has done...
Maybe it's time to stop it.
But don't you see like
I agree.
Maybe someone should have the courage and say, look, I'm not going to blame the last guy, and I really am not going to blame the last guy, and yes, and move
But isn't
forward.
it being scrambled on this issue? I think one of the things you see here is that you have people defending the program from both Democrat and Republican point, people criticizing it.
You had Rogers and Senator Feinstein both up there saying it's okay.
And it's united Bernie Sanders and Rand Paul
But we can't,
together, who are together on this issue.
But the bigger problem is we didn't even know about it. I mean, we couldn't even have had this debate. I mean, that's the bigger issue. That's been a big secret. Maybe we all would have agreed on the program or not agreed on, but it's just been a secret.
But kind of an open secret, hasn't it? I mean, we did know about for the last 6 years. There was the first revelation that phone records were being looked at. I mean, it's...
the breadth of this thing is disturbing to me, and I gotta admit, I didn't quite know that was going on.
But the scope, in a way, makes it safer. I'm sorry, if they gather 3 billion items of information, it's a lot less threatening than if they borrow 10, because then they have to rely on the algorithms that will sort out the relevant from the irrelevant.
I'd like them to focus on the people who there's reason to believe that they're a danger to this country.
This is how you find them.
But the only way we're going to have this conversation if we open up the era of government.
I think we need to know what they were actually doing, which we still don't.
The reporters who do open it up are now going to be prosecuted. Yeah. The ones who do open
not
up...
necessarily the reporters. The source might get prosecuted. We don't know that the reporters are going to be prosecuted.
Well, okay, but the experience with James Rose has let many in the industry feel a little raw about what,
No question about that. Let's move on. Another thing that happened this week, we found out that Susteren Rice, the UN ambassador, has been appointed National Security Advisor to replace Tom Donilon. Samantha Power will replace her as UN ambassador. Here was the president talking about it.
A patriot who puts her country first. She is fearless. She is tough. Her brother's here, who I play with occasionally, and it runs in the family, throwing the occasional elbow, but hitting the big shot. I'm confident we've got an experienced, effective, and energetic UN ambassador in waiting in Samantha Power. She knows the UN's strengths. She knows its weaknesses.
Well, George, consolation prize perhaps, but Susteren Rice will now be the National Security Advisor. Samantha Power, longtime advisor now to President Obama as well. The president is really drawing the ranks close in as the second term goes on.
Yes, and he's in these two people, he has two advocates of humanitarian intervention, which, so far as I can tell, is they favor interventions as in Libya that are untainted by any connection with the national interest. They're a kind of altruistic intervention, which I am skeptical of. With regard to Ms. Power, it seems to me the only good ambassadors to the UN, the ones that really matter, are those who have fundamental contempt for the institution. That is, Pat Moynihan and Jeane Kirkpatrick made a difference because they had an adversarial stance to the institution. Samantha Power serves on something in Washington called the Atrocity Prevention Board. Now think about that. What do? They convene around a table and they say, a quorum being present, let's prevent an atrocity. I mean, there's a kind of right-mindedness and feel-goodness about this that I don't think translates into policy.
I think the president's going to be well served by both. In the whole controversy involving Susteren Rice and the whole Libya thing, I think that she, was sort of an unfortunate victim in some of the way the rhetoric was thrown around, and I think she's going to do a fine job.
I actually, you know what, the president described Ambassador Rice as patriot, fearless, and tough. I'm sure she is, but what we need is someone who's going to say, instead, ask questions like, how do you know? Why are you saying this? You know, just taking directive and going out to the 5 Sunday shows and saying the same thing is not, you know, not the job.
My guess is she probably would have done it had she been national security advisor at the time.
Well, we'll have to guess. We have to hope. But it would have been better if he chose someone that we knew would stand up and say, how do you know that? Why are you saying that? This doesn't make sense.
To me, this is a perfect example of what actually has gone wrong in Washington. I think Samantha Power is very competent and very qualified. I think Ambassador Rice is very competent and very qualified, very smart people, very dedicated to the government. But just because you can appoint somebody doesn't mean you should appoint somebody. And to me, this is basically at a time when everybody says we need to lower the bitterness and lower the vitriol and bring Washington, figure out a way to get all of this screaming and yelling. He basically sticks a stick in the eye of many Republicans and says, oh, by the way, the people that you've been castigating, the people that you don't trust, I'm going to put in these 2 key positions.
But he puts them in a White House, I mean, she puts her in a White House position, not a Senate confirmable position. That would have been the in-your-face move.
No, this is even more in your face, George, I think. It basically says we're not even going to let you approve this. We're going to put them now in charge of an agency that, as we've learned in the last few days.
Now, you can alternatively view this as saying, I will not be bullied, right? You guys tore this person up for no good reason, and I'm going to show that that doesn't actually work.
But I actually think strength comes from actually going to try to reach over the other side and try to get something done.
Boy, has this guy reached, he's reached and reached and reached.
Not really.
Had all his fingers bitten off at this point in his life.
Let me bring this back to you, Paul. Friday, we saw the new jobs numbers, 175,000 jobs created last month. Unemployment ticked up just a bit to 7.6%. It seemed to be exactly what the stock market, well, you can't pretty much do anything the stock market doesn't like these days, it appears. But what's your read on what this means for the economy right now?
We are in this kind of sour equilibrium. I mean, the economy is growing, jobs are being created.
32 straight months of job growth.
Yeah, but, you know, it's a growing population, it's a growing workforce. The share of adults who are employed has been flat for several years, way below normal levels. We are just creeping up. I mean, I think there's a slow, but, you know, there's more than 4 million people who've been unemployed for more than 6 months. Still, that's an incredible number by past standards. So this is a terrible, terrible economy, and it's got a glacial pace of improvement. The fact that we think of the job report like Friday's as being a good report just shows you how depressed our expectations have become.
Wall Street thought it was good because it was so bad. It meant that the Federal Reserve would not stop printing money, the purpose of which is to pour into equities seeking high returns, run up the stock market, create a wealth effect, and, to use the magic word, trickle down to the American people.
One of the consequences seems to be, Congressman Ellison, it seems like it's taken all the air out of any effort to get a deficit reduction deal this year. With the deficit coming down, with health care costs, it appears to be coming down, the economy growing, not much happening.
I'm afraid you're right. We are not focusing on sequester, which I think is responsible for what I think are kind of lackluster job numbers. I mean, we cut 14,000 public employees in this last round. And so, I mean, I think that, you know, and the numbers are just going to keep coming with regard to sequester. And public employees, I mean, their checks spend just like everybody else's.
Yeah, I can get that. I think we were ready to have a much stronger recovery. Housing is coming back. People are feeling better. Kids are starting to form households again, all those things. And the sequester, you know, so it's not that we shouldn't be looking at this as positive job growth. We should be looking at it as, gosh, we might have been ready for takeoff here, and we have the sequester killing it.
You know, the thing that disturbs me is that the economy I see as a three-legged stool, the rich, the middle class, and the poor. And all three have to be winning and surviving, and we do nothing about the poor. You know, we play with all these numbers and look at all the unemployment, but we still aren't digging into the inner city and going to the poverty, the huge poverty at the bottom in this city.
Obamacare is actually a huge anti-poverty program, and it kicks in full on January 1st.
I think it's got a lot of other problems.
In every state.
Well, no, you have in a lot of states, right? You know, yes, it's not going to do anything for the poor.
But it's going
to do a lot for them in California. It's going to do a lot for them in New York. We still matter here.
But the problem is, if we don't, I mean, whether for humanitarian purposes or just selfish purposes, as the poor class grows, it's a bigger problem for the middle class and the wealthy.
And I'm pick up on something Greta said. 90% of this country, people in this country, have had no real movement in their financial situation, more than 90%, in 15 years, basically, 15 years.
The poor.
And part of the thing that we all haven't really faced is are we in this new normal? Are we in a new normal economy where 400,000 jobs a month or 500,000 jobs a month or increases in average wages are a thing of the past? And I think at some point we have to have this conversation about where are we as a country and our institutions, our government institutions, do they meet where we are as a 21st century country? Because 95%, every time we point out the stock market's doing great, 95% of the country isn't benefiting.
You go back even farther than 15 years for most working-age American males. You go back to 1979, there hasn't been any real...
George, if I may say, sir, there is a very positive trend. You have all these low-wage fast food workers, New York, Chicago, all over the country, who are literally going on strike, even at $8 an hour, to try to demand an increase in their pay. So, you know, as Congress is not raising the minimum wages, we're stuck. Ordinary Americans who are the working poor are trying to fight.
Wait till the health care hits those fast food restaurants.
Got to take a quick break. We'll be back with more Roundtable after this.